A lot is made about meaning, about story in photography. And yes, there is a time and a place for that. But without knowing the basics of the language of photography, your images will always be that muddled. They won't have the impact or the emotional effect on the viewer that they could have had if only you had known the simple ways that you can help your photographs speak with their own voice. How's it? Think back to when you were at school, learning to read and write. You started off learning basic words. Bull, cat, dog, blancmange, that sort of thing. And eventually you could put sentences together. My little boy right now is doing just that. He's learning the words which he uses to express, how he feels about the world. However, even though he knows lots of words, he doesn't know grammar or the framework on which to hang those words. Photographers are often like this. They learn the basics of using a camera, a few buzzwords, and off they go, right? Creating the photographic equivalent of basically just tracing letters. Now, copying techniques and styles is an important aspect in learning, but if you are never really taught the why are these images being made in a certain way, then you are losing out on so much. So what often happens is that because they now know the words, but not how to put them together in a way that has balance, the photographs almost need to be somehow decoded. Fortunately, it is a lot easier to learn the framework of photography than English grammar because it's centered around just a few basic, simple core concepts. Once you have this framework in place, you can then, of course, start to hang little flourishes and visual embellishments on it that will improve the image, enhance it, and not muddle it. By the end of this video, you're going to know how to start using these concepts in harmony with each other and be inspired to create more eloquent images that I know that you are capable of. The first element are lines. Now, lines are one of the most basic aspects of any visual art, and photography, of course, is no exception. Possibly one of the very first drawing exercises you ever did was, those perspective lines of trains and what have you. In photography, lines come in many shapes and sizes, thick, thin, long, short, horizontal, vertical, squiggly, and everything in between. They take pretty much any form that you can think of. Roads, railways, ropes, fences, those really blatantly obvious ones, but there are so many more wherever you look. Lines can also convey mood, they can convey action. Think of a tall building with dead straight lines. It's powerful, it's solid, it's imposing and immovable. The same building photographed with its lines at an oblique angle or at a tilt has a very different feel, because you can see how easy it is to start to shape the way that a viewer is interpreting your photograph by just these simple aspects of lines. Of course, you are no doubt aware that you can use lines to draw your viewer's eye to certain sections of the scene, to use them to frame elements and compartmentalize subject by using shape. Now, experiment with finding lines in your surroundings. Photograph as many lines as you can discover in as many ways as possible to see for yourself how they make you interpret the scene differently. Because lines are so basic, there is a tendency to overlook them, to not give them their due attention, and to not do that is to miss a crucial element in designing any photograph. What is this? Of course, you know what it is, because your eye recognizes that shape. If I show you even a partial outline of a house or a car or the face, you know what it is. Think of a shape like a container. And because your eye is drawn to shapes, you can use them to hold important elements of the scene. Within that shape, you can include, as much or as little information as you like, all of which conveys a mood depending on what you choose. Look at my own shape, for example. I am lit evenly, so you can see my face. You can see what is contained within the shape of my body. If I were only silhouetted, then this talk would have a very different feel. It would be moody and have a mystery and an intrigue. Think of a building silhouetted. Who knows what's going on in those murky depths? But the same silhouetted, picked out against a bright sky, with all of its details revealed, of course has quite another feeling. If you want to be obvious about the thing that you're photographing, then include its whole shape, or at least a large portion of it. And if you want the viewer to have a reason to pause, to look closely at your images, then suggest or hint at a shape, because your mind, or their mind, will try and complete it, to figure out what it is. Combine these elements. Make your photographs a visual mystery to be solved. Edward Weston famously did this with his peppers, as did Imogen Cunningham with her flowers. Both of them moved away from the obvious shape of the subjects they were photographing, which we are all familiar with. And of course, in doing so, created images that held our attention, and still do, because they have toyed with our mind's interpretation of a shape that we take for granted. If you are going to use shapes, then remember they are at their strongest when they are contrasted and separated from the background. Again, look at the screen for an example. I am wearing a light shirt, jumper, right? I am picked out against the darker background. The shape of my body is extremely obvious. If I were to be wearing a black shirt and, black curtains, then the shape would be less defined. You know these are lips because of their shape, but their fullness is conveyed by form. Think of form as the secret sauce that helps bring a photograph to life. When you photograph something that can be held in the hand of a viewer, an apple or a cup, for example, and you highlight its form, you give that object a distinctive realness. Because it's something we can hold, and we have experience of holding, these types of images that contain form and shape that we understand and can hold invoke a far stronger emotional response to them than if we were to look at, for example, a mountain, which we quite clearly can't hold in our hand. The way to include form in your images, to tease it out, is to include shadow and shading in your image. A flat-lit egg just has a shape. There's no real feel to it. There's no realness. But an egg that is lit to include shading from one side or the other now takes on a very different mood. It has a bit more of a presence and a bit more of a 3D quality that makes it come off the page. As is so often in photography, the key to this is how the object is lit. Harsh light picks out and creates sharply defined shapes. Just think of like craggy mountain peaks when they are lit from the side by setting sun. But soft, diffuse light blurs and smooths out shadow. When you are looking at the scene to be photographed, think about how the light could change the way that the scene is interpreted because of these shifting forms and shapes because of the change in light. Form is very closely related to texture. And as far as I'm concerned, texture is probably one of the most overlooked elements in photography. After all, prints and screens are smooth. You can't feel a photograph with your fingertips, but your mind does. The eye knows. Including texture in your photograph can give the viewer different feelings about, similar subjects. Think of photographers of newborn babies. They use those soft, gentle wrapping lines, the giant soft boxes, they're like 10 times bigger than the baby. Not because they want to protect the baby's eyes or something like that, but because the parents will respond to having images that feel soft and gentle, that are reminiscent of how the baby's skin feels. It feels smooth. To harshly sidelight a baby would feel odd somehow. It wouldn't work. So that soft light, it suits the mood. Of course, the converse is if you photograph a weather-beaten face using a giant diffuser and some reflectors, and you're filling in all the wrinkles, then you take away the texture of that skin. And in doing so, you remove not only the character of the sitter, but a point of connection with the viewer's mind, because they can feel the leatheriness of the skin almost. They can feel the weather-beaten, and that helps build up the picture in the viewer's head and to give it more, again, realness. It is easy to confuse shape and texture, but think of a sand dune. The gentle curve that's caused by the wind is the overall shape. It is imposing, yet it is very graceful. But the way the sun is lighting the sand itself is telling our minds, because there is texture, that this is not a soft, marshmallowy, gentle kind of wave, but a gritty sea of sand. And we can feel it within our teeth. We can feel it in between our toes. Color is probably the trickiest element to deal with in photography, because poor use of color can absolutely destroy a photograph, just as much as a skilled use of it will elevate an image into something ethereal. Color has the capacity to dominate all of the other elements that we've talked about without even trying. And that power is what makes color such an important aspect to consider in your photography. All of the elements that we have talked about in this video so far are extremely important. I've only really just briefly touched on them. If you'd like to know more about exploring these elements and how to put them into practice in your photography, then check out my Learning to See course. Very basically speaking, there are bold colors, there are bright colors, and then there are muted and soft colors. Now, bold color picks out objects. It, as we know, stimulates and excites the senses. Should you be confronted by a bold color where you don't want it, then you can try and minimize its impact by placing it in the shadows. If you want to highlight that bold color, you can make it even stronger by contrasting it against something dark. Think about how the yellows of a setting sun are so much brighter when there is a dark cloud behind them. You can combine color, of course, to make its own shapes and forms. Abstract photography is a fantastic example of that. So do think about how color can play a greater role in your photography beyond just the basic things that we know. You know, red is for excitement and blue is calm and what have you. Alex Webb is an expert of balancing out bright and bold colors with shadow to create shape and form in his images. I will link to his video at the end of this, and I'd highly recommend you go and check it out. Of course, the most obvious thing when talking about color is talking about excitement. But if you want to create a more relaxed and introspective mood in your images, then consider muted colors. Think of how a scene looks on a cloudy, overcast day. Now compare that to a bright, sunny day. This is an association in your mind at work. Now think, overcast days in the real world tend to be cold weather and, muted light, all these kind of things. They come from these snow days where the sky is just one giant white thing, this cloud that consumes everything, where the wind is whipping at your neck and the light is extremely soft and nondescript. And often when you look at that within your own photographs, you can give the viewer that feeling of chilliness just by using muted color. The next time you're out photographing and you come across a scene, take a moment to step back. Let that scene just sit with you for a moment. If you're a street photographer, then seek out a place where you can lay out these elements to be the stage on which your photograph will play out. Before you think of composition and exposure, any of that kind of stuff, break the image down into the 5 elements we talked about today. How can you use them to lay the foundation on which you can create your photograph? They're not the be-all and end-all of your images, but they're merely a starting point. And from here you can start to combine them along with the other photographic visual flourishes that will combine to form your own unique artistic voice. I mentioned Alex Webb earlier, and he is a fantastic example of how a photographer takes this basic framework and builds on it in their own unique way. I would click on this video here to see more about him. Thank you once again for watching.